Today we are going to explore an important concept in software design pattern, that is the chain of responsibility design pattern. This pattern is a key tool in the arsenal of software developers, enabling creation of flexible and scalable systems. The chain of responsibility design pattern is a behavioral design pattern that allow an object to pass a request along a chain of potential handlers until the request is processed. This pattern promotes the decoupling of sender and receiver, giving multiple objects a chance to handle a single request without hard coding the handler into the sender. Each handler decides either to process the request or to pass it to the next handler in the chain. This structure allows multiple handlers the opportunity to process the request, leading to the flexible processing.
The main goal of the chain of responsibility is to allow multiple handlers to process a request. Let me tell you how it works. Instead of sending a request to one specific handler, the request is passed along a chain of potential handlers. Each handler gets a chance to process the request. You are working on an online ordering system. You want to restrict access to the system so only authenticated users can create orders. Also, users who have administrative permissions must have full access to all orders. After a bit of planning, you realized that these checks must be performed sequentially. The application can attempt to authenticate a user to the system whenever it receives a request that contains the user's credentials. However, if those credentials aren't correct and authentication fails, there is no reason to proceed with any other some problems and their solutions. So, tightly coupled sender and receivers. So the problem is, in some systems, the part that sends a request and the part that handles it are directly connected. This makes the system rigid and hard to change. So, the chain of responsibility breaks this directly. The sender doesn't need to know who will handle the request. It just sends the request into the chain and any handler can process it. Next is handling different types of request flexibility. Problem is, different requests might need different handling. If the sender has to know all possible handlers, it gets complicated. So the solution is, in this pattern, each handler in the chain checks if it can handle the request. If it can, it processes the request. If not, it passes it to the next handler in the chain. This way, different types of requests can be handled flexibility and independently. Easier management and extension. Adding new ways to handle a request usually means changing a lot of code. With the chain of responsibility, you can add new handlers without altering the existing code. Just add the new handler to the chain and it will start receiving requests. Avoiding complex conditional code. Without this pattern, you might end up with a lots of if or switch statement to handle different requests, making the code messy and hard to maintain. This pattern eliminates the need for such conditional code. Each handler is responsible for checking and processing requests, keeping the code clean and many other behavioral design patterns. The chain of responsibility relies on transforming particular behaviors into standalone objects called handlers. In our case, each check should be extracted to its own class with a single method that performs the check. The request along with its data is passed to this method as an argument. In our example, with ordering system, a handler performs the processing and then decides whether to pass the request further down the chain. Assuming the request contains the right data, all the handlers can execute their primary behavior, whether it's authentication checks or caching.
Structure of chain of responsibility. The chain of responsibility pattern consists of several core components: handler, base handler, client, and concrete handlers. Each component plays a crucial role in the pattern, ensuring requests are processed properly. Understanding each component is critical to implement the pattern effectively. The handler. The handler interface serves as a blueprint for all concrete handlers within the chain of responsibility pattern. It declares a common interface that defines how requests should be handled. Typically, this interface includes a method like handler request that each concrete handler must implement. This method specifies how a handler processes a request. Additionally, in some implementations, the handler interface may also include a method for setting the next handler in the chain, ensuring that handlers are linked together in a sequential order. By providing a uniform interface, the handler ensures that all concrete handlers can process requests in a consistent and standardized manner. This promotes flexibility and extensibility within the pattern, allowing new handlers to be added or existing ones to be modified without affecting the client code. The base handler. The base handler class is an optional component in the chain of responsibility pattern, intended to encapsulate common functionality shared among different handlers. It typically defines a reference to the next handler in the chain, allowing seamless passing of requests along the chain. This reference enables each to delegate requests to the next handler in the sequence, if it cannot handle the request itself. Additionally, the base handler may implement default handling behavior for requests, which concrete handler can choose to override as needed. By providing a base class with shared functionality, the implementation of the pattern becomes more straightforward and less prone to code duplication. The client. The client is a key participant in the chain of responsibility pattern. It holds the responsibility for creating and composing chain of handlers, either dynamically or statically, depending on the application requirement and logic. The client decides the sequence in which handlers are linked together to process requests. It determines the starting point of the chain and sends requests to the appropriate handler. The client's role is crucial as it influences how requests flow through the chain, affecting the overall behavior and functionality of the pattern. Concrete handlers. The concrete handlers are the implementation classes within the chain of responsibility pattern. They contain the actual code for processing requests within the chain. Each concrete handler decides whether to handle a request based on its own logic. If it can handle the request, it does so. Otherwise, it passes the request along to the next handler in the chain. This flexibility allows for diverse handling logic within the same chain, as each handler can have its own unique way of processing.
Now, to proceed, we'll explore the chain of responsibility design pattern by looking into the ATM handlers, a real world example. This example will help you to see how this pattern works in the real world scenario. We are considering an ATM cash withdrawal. Imagine you're using an ATM with a withdrawal cash. Here, how the chain of responsibility pattern helps the ATM dispense the exact amount you requested. For the for this example, we are considering that we are going to dispense the 1350 rupees. So, in first dispenser, that is the 500 dispenser, the machine starts with the highest denomination available. It dispenses two notes of 500 rupees, each total 1000 rupees. It now has 350 rupees left to dispense. It passes this remainder to the next handler as in the chain responsibility pattern. Now, the next dispenser in the chain is for 100 rupees notes. It dispenses the three notes of 100. It has now 50 rupees left to dispense and it passes the remainder to the next handler. The final dispenser in the chain is 50 rupees dispenser. It dispenses one note and there is no remainder left. The request is complete. How it works? Actually, in partial processing, each handler, also known as dispenser in this example, processes part of a request and passes to the remaining part of the next handler. And this ensures that the ATM can handle any withdrawal amount using the available denominations. It also provides the modularity. Each dispenser works independently. If you need to add or remove any denomination, you can easily do so without affecting the whole system. No handler is dependent on any other handler. Each is independent. Now, to illustrate this, we will be using the class diagram of chain of that how chain of responsibility works for this example. Here you'll see the starting the chain, the dispenser chain. Object is created and it set up for the first rupee dispenser in the chain. That might be rupees dispenser that handles 500 rupees note. When a request to withdraw a certain amount is made, the dispenser chain calls the dispense method from the rupee dispenser. The dispenser check if it can dispense 500 rupees note, it dispense as many as that it can. The next handler in the chain would be 100 rupees that would take over and it dispenses as many 100 rupees notes as it can. The final handler in that example will be 50 rupees, so it dispenses the remaining 50 rupees. Each rupee dispenser is a chain is responsible for handling its specific denomination and passing any remaining amount to the next handler. This modular setup allows for easy changings and extension. If you need to add any denomination like 200 rupees or 300 rupees, you can simply add a new dispenser. By organizing the system this way, the chain of responsibility pattern ensures that the ATM can efficiently and flexibly handle any withdrawal request using the available denomination while keeping the code clean and modular. Now, let's break down the code and explain how it relates to the chain of responsibility. First class is the dispenser chain. This class represents the chain itself. It holds the reference to the first handler, that is chain. In the constructor set up the chain by creating instance of different denomination handlers that are repeat dispensers and linking them together. The dispense method is used to start the chain by invoking the dispense method to the first handler chain. The second class is repeat dispenser. This class is a concrete handler, as we know that in the structure of chain of responsibility that dispenses currency to specific denominations. It extends base dispenser implementing the dispense method to handle its request. Third, there is an interface defining the contract for handlers in the chain. It declares method set next to set the next handler in the chain and dispense the handle to the request. Next class is currency. This class represents the currency to be dispensed. It has simple amount attribute. Base dispenser. This is an abstract class implementing the dispenser interface. It holds a reference to the next handler in the chain. Then there is ATM demo. This is a client code that demonstrates that how the chain of responsibility pattern works here. It creates an instance of dispenser chain and invokes dispense. In a summary, the chain of responsibility pattern allow multiple objects to handle the request without the sender needing to know which object will ultimately handle the request. In this ATM example, different handlers request different denominations of currency and each handler decide whether it can handle the request or should pass it to the next handler in the chain. This promotes loose coupling between sender and receiver, enhancing the flexibility and scalability of the code. That's it. Thank you so much.